Welcome back to the Cipher Brief Studio. It's my pleasure to welcome Admiral Jim Stavridis, one of our very favorite guests around here, who always just puts the world in such crisp, what am I looking for? You provide context, crisp context around what's going on in the world. And there's a lot going on. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization, as you know, Admiral, just wrapped its annual summit where Chinese President Xi Jinping, Russian President Vladimir Putin, and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi all presented the Shanghai Cooperation Organization as an alternative to the Western-led order. This isn't a surprise, but it's concerning on a number of levels, and I wanted to ask your perspective on just how seriously you should think that we should be viewing the SCO as a potential counterweight to NATO and a lot of the Western alliances that exist today. How worried are you?
I'm very worried, Suzanne, and I'll tell you why. For years, the Shanghai Cooperative Organization kind of stumbled along, was kind of quiet. It's got 10 members. It started out with 5. The big 2, obviously, are Russia and China. Never really had much throw weight in the world. Well, all of a sudden, the Shanghai Cooperative Organization is looking pretty good to a lot of different countries and nations, notably India, which joined a few years ago, but has always kind of held SCO at arm's length. But now, because they're being pushed away, the Indians pushed away by the United States over tariffs, all of a sudden you see the SCO has become less just a little talk shop for Russia and China, and pulling India in, the world's largest democracy, very, very significant. It's time to worry about this new alignment.
Yeah, I mean, they're talking about things like multipolarity, global South solidarity, and the Chinese president is pledging financial support, development initiatives. Even what I thought was very interesting was a commitment to an AI, an SCO-focused AI center, which is concerning on a lot of levels. Let me ask you first, given your experience as Supreme Allied Commander at NATO, what do you think the implications are of China and Russia using this particular forum to project influence over maritime security routes, particularly in the Indian Ocean and beyond? Because that's another top priority issue, is it not?
It absolutely is. And this is why, if you want to understand where the SCO is going and how important it could be, watch 2 things. One is the growing rapprochement, technical diplomatic term here, the condominium between Russia and China. That's meaning not a formal alliance. And the SCO is not a defensive military alliance the way NATO is, thank God. But watch for the 2 of them to draw closer and closer together. Watch their military exercises and activities. That's one key indicator. And the other we talked about a moment ago, Suzanne, it's the obvious warmth of Modi as he kind of basks in the sunshine coming from both President Xi and President Putin. Those are the 2 things to work, and they are moving in the wrong direction from the perspective of the United States.
Okay, let me drill down on that a little bit with you, because I think you're absolutely right. You know, India is both a U.S. partner through the Quad, but also, as you mentioned, a participant in this SCO, a very warmly welcome participant, where Modi really openly embraced both Putin and Xi. So how should Washington interpret India's role in this balancing act? And then what risks or opportunities do you see in, I don't want to call it dual posturing, but dual posturing?
Indeed, the Washington ought to be carefully assessing every single element of our interactions with India, which are not going well at the moment, notably because of very high tariffs that we have levied on New Delhi, principally because of India's financial support to Russia in the Ukrainian war. We also see a lot of personal antipathy at the moment, it seems, between President Trump and Modi. And that all needs to be carefully assessed in Washington with an eye toward how do we pull the Indians back in our direction. I think if you want geopolitics 101 in the 21st century, on one side, it's the authoritarian states, Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, Venezuela. On the other side, it's the democracies of the West. Who's kind of right there in the middle? That would be India and a lot of the global South alongside them. We ought to be doing everything we can to kind of pull them back in our direction. That's economic tools, military interaction, using diplomacy like the Quad. We've got work to do with India. They're going to be a crucial geopolitical actor in this century.
All right. So Xi's message of really true multilateralism, as he calls it, and prioritizing the global South, and you mentioned many of those global South countries, does seem to really be resonating. What steps do you think the U.S. needs to take to compete more effectively for influence? And maybe more importantly, why is that influence so important to future U.S. national security?
Let me start with the second half of your question first, and it goes back to the basic geopolitical alignment. We're not in that old-fashioned Cold War, United States versus Soviet Union, and the rest of the world kind of dangling there. We're in a very complex, multi-dimensional world, and Xi correctly sees this. And if we don't engage, we're going to lose influence in broad swaths of the world, and it's going to hurt our business, our commerce, our military security. So what do we do about it? The answer is we ought to have a plan. We ought to have a structured plan that includes economic elements. Here, we're really talking tariffs. We need to recognize, even if we really like the revenue from tariffs, maybe there's a downside in how other nations look at us. Secondly, militarily. Here, we've got real strengths, offering military cooperation to a lot of countries that are kind of not already on Team West would make a lot of sense. And in particular, a nation like India, for example. And then thirdly, diplomatically, we ought to use our position of strength in treaty organizations around the world to try and pull these nations in our direction. And I'll close with this, Suzanne. Guess who does have a plan? China. And they are executing it very well at the moment. And the events of the summit of the SCO are a pretty good example. And final thought, it'll be followed up in the next day or so with a massive military parade, absolutely showcasing China's growing military.
That's right. Icing on the cake, it seems, for this particular SCO. Let me ask you, Putin used the SCO stage really to blame NATO expansion for the war in Ukraine. I'm wondering how you think platforms like this really amplify that Russian and Chinese narrative, and what's the most effective counter strategy for the West right now? What do? You can't just sit there and take it.
Putin's, as usual, lying and making it up as he goes along. The reason Ukraine is in a state of war is because Russia invaded it. And it is not possible to drop a plumb line backwards to NATO expansion. And oh, by the way, every one of those Warsaw Pact countries, we didn't send tanks in there to force them to join NATO. They begged to join NATO because they had spent decades with a Russian boot on their throat. So let's be clear about who's the villain here and who's the victim. In terms of what we can do about it, it's shine a light, talk about it, have our own fora. NATO is a much bigger, more powerful military organization than the SCO. We have strong alliances in Asia. We need to leverage our skill sets in those kind of settings to lay out the case for the West. Look, final thought, our ideals are the right ones. Democracy, liberty, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of education, gender equality, human rights, racial equality. Look, we execute them imperfectly. They're the right values. We need to lead with those values, not apologize. And over time, the long throw of history, I think, will be on our side.
and maybe
Yeah.
convene more based on those values, according to you. Final question for you, Admiral. China pledged a new SCO artificial intelligence cooperation center, which is really disturbing on a number of levels. From a military and security standpoint alone, what are the risks of adversaries building these shared technological models?
Very dangerous. We're in a foot race to see who can most quickly assimilate AI as a security mechanism, as a military organization. And we can not like that, but the reality is AI is going to be a big part of the battlefield, just like it is a part of every aspect of life. So we need to get on step. And I would start with NATO. Here you've got countries that have very advanced capabilities, of course, the United States, but also our European allies. Invite in the Japanese to cooperate with NATO, the South Koreans. We can do a great deal to increase the pace we are moving at in this foot race. And it's going to be fundamental to how the 21st century unfolds in terms of security.
There's a lot of serious stuff going on in the world, Admiral. We always love welcoming you to kind of help us, as I mentioned right off the top, put it into context. But I have to leave on a little bit happier note, or it all gets just a bit too depressing. I heard a rumor that the third book in your trilogy, 2084, is coming out in March. Is that true?
I think it's pushed back slightly. It'll be in May, but yeah, 2034 was about a war with China, 2054 about artificial intelligence, and 2084, I'll tease it, is about climate and what will be happening by 2084 in the world of climate and security. It'll be out next spring.
Your novels always seem to be just on the cusp of what's coming, so I actually look to them for my new crystal ball. Admiral Jim Stavridis, thank you so much for joining us here in the Cipher Brief Studio. It's always a pleasure.